Celtic world has more than its share of the supernatural, legends, and myth, which sometimes cross the line into reality. I tell those tales here on Dark Celtic History.
Today I'm going to tell you a story, the legend of Moddley Dubh. In the days when Charles II was King of England, and Earl of Derby was King of Mann, Peel Castle stood tall on the Isle of Man. It was originally constructed by the Vikings, and the castle stands on St. Patrick's Isle today and is connected to the town by a causeway. It was always garrisoned by soldiers during that time, though. The guardroom was just inside the great entrance of the castle, and a passage was used to lead from it through one of the old churches to the captain of the guardroom. So at the end of the day, back then, when one of these soldiers would lock the castle gates, he would carry the key through the dark passage to the captain's room. The soldiers used to take turns doing this. Well, about this time, this big black dog with rough curly hair started to be seen. Sometimes in one room, next time in a different room. He didn't belong to anyone, and apparently no one knew anything about him. Nobody knew who fed him. They didn't know if it was real or if it was a ghost. But every night when the candles were lit in the guardroom and the fire was burning bright, he would come down the dark passage and lay himself down by the hearth. They could hear him start to come down the passage. They could hear the clickety-clicks on his claws on the stones. Now, he made no sound, though, once he got into the room and laid down there, and he lay there until the break of day, when he would get up and just disappear into the passage. Now, the soldiers were at first terrified of him, but sometime they got used to seeing him, and they'd lost a little bit of that fear, though they still looked upon him as something more than mortal. Whilst he was in the room, the men were quiet and sober. They spoke no bad words, and when the hour came to carry the key to the captain, two of them always would go together. No man would face the dark passage alone. However, one night, a foolish fellow who had drunk more than it was good for him began to brag and boast that he wasn't afraid of that big black dog. It was not his turn to take the keys, but he would do it and show how brave he was. He said that he would take them alone. He dared the dog to follow him. "Let him come," he shouted, laughing. "I'll see whether this dog is dog or devil." His friends were terrified and tried to hold him back, but he snatched up the keys and went into the passage alone. The black dog got up slowly from the fire and followed him. There was deathly silence in the guardroom. No sound was heard but the dashing of the waves on the steep rocks of the castle inlet. But after a few minutes there came a most unearthly scream or howl from the dark passage. But not a soldier dared to move to see what was going on. They looked at each other in horror. Presently they heard steps, and the rash fellow came rushing back into the room. His face was ghostly pale and twisted with fear, and he spoke not a word, then or afterwards. 3 days went by. He was in shock and didn't speak to anybody, and then he was found dead, and nobody ever knew what had happened to him that fearful night. The black dog, though, occasionally, rarely, is still seen.